Guys, Chris, alcoholic. Grateful to be here. Grateful to be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and deeply honored to introduce Matt. Matt is not only a very close friend of mine, but he's also my sponsor and has been sponsoring me for the last 10 years of my sobriety. And I've gotten to know Matt very well and his family, and really admire his recovery and the work that he's done in Alcoholics Anonymous, and the transformation that has happened in his life. Matt always talks to me about the importance of prayer and meditation, and that's how we perfect and enlarge our spiritual life. And whenever I'm having some difficulties or struggling, the first thing that Matt always talks to me about is, are you praying about it, right? Are you connecting with God? And so I couldn't think of a better person to talk about the 11th step than Matt. So Matt, turning it over to you, brother. Love you.
Thank you very much, man. I love you too. And yeah, welcome to everybody else. Alice, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be of service always for Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not sure where most of you are at, if you're all out west or spread over the United States or up north in Canada, but it's just so awesome that Alcoholics Anonymous has reached all corners of the world. And well, by the grace of God, um, I was blessed with the gift of sobriety on April 30th of 2010. And for me, that is the most important date um, of my life. And it will remain that. And my wife feels the same way. Even though we got married a couple of years ago, she is one of us as well. She's not here tonight. She's at her home group. She may come in, though, at some point. So if she does, I apologize if there's a disruption. She's going to try to behave herself as much as she can. And we have a little, Chris knows, we got a little dog here too that is not used to me talking to myself in our home. So if he starts to get out of control, I apologize for that. You may want to say a prayer for me that his name's Velo. Say a prayer that he remains calm. So yeah, so with that, I don't get it twisted. I need all of you. It's not the other way around, and it's been a true joy of my life to be a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and to have encountered all the people that I've encountered, like Chris. Welcome to anybody who's new to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if anybody is celebrating an anniversary, congratulations. My dear friend, my brother, Chris Ray, is actually celebrating 10 years of sobriety as of yesterday. So, and he was fortunate enough today. I'm quite jealous because of work. He's in the Ohio area, and he got to go to Dr. Bob's house today and was sending me pictures from Dr. Bob's house in Akron, where, as most of you know, the reason we are all here today is because of that place and the people that were in Akron when God put them there. I really believe, and this is just me, but I truly believe that, for us in Alcoholics Anonymous, for those of us that have made it here, we've made it here because somebody has prayed for us. Some of us will never meet that person. There's probably a reason for that. We may mess it up. Um, and some of us may have met that person. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they prayed for us to get to Alcoholics Anonymous, but at some point they did pray for us. Um, and I know that to be true today. I love the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have it here. If you guys can see, it's kept together with a rubber band, and the binding is completely gone. My sponsor, who has 28 years of sobriety, instructed me to get a new book a while back. So I have done that, but this one is very special to me, as it is for probably most people. Um, and the 12 and 12 is something that's very special to me too. My sponsor, he's along with some other men have taken a lot of time with me over the last 15 years to enable me to develop a relationship with God that I definitely did not have when I came here, nor was I seeking. So I thought. So I do have a sponsor. His name's Jerry G. 28 years sober. Um, I have a grant sponsor, Bill P. Who it's amazing how this thing works, but he just celebrated 50 years of sobriety. We were all up in Vancouver for the international. A bunch of us were. I'm sure some of you were too. I think Alice, you were there, but unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to see each other. But uh, he missed being able to sit in the old timer section by 2 weeks. uh, it was neat to see how he approached that, how he handled that. Because at the last international, at that time, I think it was you had to have 45 years of sobriety to sit in the old timer section, and then between then and now, that they changed it to 50. So, but we gave him one hell of an anniversary, 50-year anniversary party at his home group after we all got back from Vancouver. It was, I think that meeting lasted. Whew, I think that meeting lasted 2.5 hours. It might be the longest meeting I've ever sat in. But those men and the man that sponsored my sponsor prior to Bill, who passed away um, around 2020. Um, uh, I can't say enough about these men who truly know what it means to give your time and your energy and all your resources to helping the next alcoholic. And so that's what these men did for me. And I just pray that, as the days go by, that I make myself available to the newcomer who comes in here dying from this thing, because that's how I came in here. I came in here not knowing 24 hours prior to surrendering to alcoholism that this life was about to um, take place. There was no notion, there was no indication, as far as I was concerned, that I was on the verge of surrendering to alcoholism. At the time, if I wanted to eat, uh, I would steal food to feed myself. I had a trash bag that I kept all of my things in, which wasn't much, as you can imagine. I was living in a place where there was no utilities or running water, just full of empty liquor bottles and other things. Um, Lots of things crawling on the floor, myself included. The windows were all boarded up, um, like alcoholism likes to do. It got me in a very dark place, and it got me very isolated. And I had been living like that for many years. And so, I love how Bill says in his story, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I felt in the bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I was overwhelmed. I met my match. Alcohol was my master. And without being introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous yet, I experienced that exact feeling the morning of April 30th. And I made a phone call that forever changed my life. And I said the three words that I had no idea what was going to be on the other end of that. But I called one of the very few people that would pick up a phone call from me anymore. And that person answered their phone, and I was able to mutter the words, I need help. And he asked me very quickly where I was at. And I told him, and he said, can you hold on? And I suppose he sensed the desperation in my voice. And he was there within a matter of 15 or 20 minutes. And we talked for a little bit down at the bottom of the steps outside of the building that I was in. At that time, I did not, and I don't mean this grandiose. I don't mean this to sound grandiose, but I did not appear the way I appear today. I had lots of scars and scabs and bruises and very malnourished. Couldn't look anybody in the eye. Sorry, my dog's freaking out. Uh, and I was just very sick. and he said, let's go upstairs and talk. So we went upstairs and talked. And what came out of that was I said, I don't know where I need to go, but I need to go somewhere. Please take me. And so he made a few phone calls. And later that day, I found myself in a drug and alcohol treatment facility here in the greater St. Louis area, where, thanks to a lot of very professional people that were very well versed in treating people such as ourselves, they realized quickly that I was in need of medical attention immediately. And I was rushed to a psychiatric unit in the St. Louis area. And that's where I spent the first 10 to 12 days of my journey. I think it's so awesome that people like us can end up in places like that and we can come out and live these beautiful lives. Miracles do happen in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was fascinated by the fact that, and I've been able to travel a lot, but when I started traveling out of the country, that other countries would allow me into their country, and that the United States of America would allow me back in, living the way I used to live. What a blessing! And so, I had a lot of time to think on some things while I was in there in the hospital, and thanks to a lot of doctors and nurses and psychiatrists, they did help me detox and recover. And in the things that I was thinking about, I share now only when it serves good purpose. But it was some events that took place in my life that, if you would have asked me at that time, it was the reason as to why life went in the direction that it went for me. And that was the death of my father and the death of my mother. My father passed away when I was 15 years old. Up until that point, he was, everything I guess a little boy would ever think to ask for. Father, a police officer, took very good care of himself, took care of his family. And we were always together. My mother, my father, and I have a brother who's 15 months younger than I. He lives in Mesa today, retired from the United States Marine Corps after 20 plus years as sergeant major. So, um, and so, our father got diagnosed with a form of cancer, and we all treated it as if he would beat that cancer. Um, and so, life started to take on a different meaning, I guess is the best way to say, during that time. And one thing that I can always recall is that, I never felt like we couldn't pray in our home, but prayer just wasn't a part of our family dynamic. It was if we went to spend time with grandma and grandpa. We would always pray there, and she would always make sure that we went to church. On the, I guess you call it the important holidays, Christmas and Easter and so on. And again, I never felt like prayer wasn't something that we could do in our home, or being judged for it. It's just something that we didn't do. And I'll never forget. My father was a runner. He liked to jog, and before he really started taking treatment for it. Well, he had been taking treatment for it, but they were looking at possibly doing some other type of experimental procedure that was, this is back in the 90s, that was, they thought was having some success, and they were trying to figure out if he was a candidate for it. And if not, there wasn't much more that the chemo was going to be able to do for him. But he was still able to get out and run a little bit, and we had a church behind our home. And I caught him. I was walking home from school one day, and it doesn't really matter what type of church it was, but it was a Catholic church. And I saw he was out for a jog. I could tell because he was dressed like he was out for a jog. But I happened to look over, and a pastor was opening the door to the church and welcoming him in. And you guys, I have to tell you, I immediately drew a conclusion of what I thought that was. And the conclusion that I came to is that my father was going in there to beg for his life. And so when my father passed away, a year and a half after being diagnosed, what did I do? I drew an immediate resentment, and I will go as far as saying as a hatred towards God. And it was profound, and it was sudden. And within a matter of 2 weeks, I took my first drink. And so on goes the story of alcoholism in my life. 18 years it lasted, a daily deadly obsession for me. I was 15 when I started drinking, and I was 33 when I sobered up. And today I'm 48, which is just incredible for me to think about that I've made it to 48 years old. Um, and so the other thing that I was thinking about a lot while I was in the hospital was the death of my mother. My mother was one of us. She was someone who I didn't know it at the time because I was so caught up in me, selfishness and self-centeredness to the extreme, like our book says. But she had made an attempt at coming into the rooms, and she's like you would see with some people who get 30 days, 60 days, 90 days sober, a year. Um, you start to see things change in their life. And then, like the book says, thanks for the information. And for whatever reason, you don't see that person anymore. And my mother was one of those. And unfortunately, it, because of that decision, she no longer had the fight within her to continue living, and she committed suicide in 2008. So that was 2 years prior to me sobering up. And and so those were the two things that really I allowed to define Matt Wunderlich. And I'm one of those people who, if you show me some sympathy, I will take that and I will use that and I will twist it in ways that become very dark and insidious, and use it to get whatever it is I need to get. And that started pretty quickly for me. And it got me to where it got me. So, I love in the 12 and 12. One Chris can tell you this, but one of my favorite parts of the 12 and 12 is actually uh, the one of the last few paragraphs of step one, and it says, "Who wishes to be rigorously honest and tolerant? Who wants to confess his faults to another and make restitution for harm done? Who cares anything about a higher power, let alone meditation and prayer? Who wants to sacrifice time and energy in trying to carry the AA message to the next sufferer?" It says the average alcoholic, self-centered to the extreme, will not care for these prospects unless he has to do these things in order to stay alive himself. And it goes on to say, under the lash of alcoholism, we are driven to AA, and there we discover the fatal nature of our illness. And so it was an obsession for me that it's all I could think about. It's all I ever wanted, was to not feel whatever it was that was going on with me. Um, and so when I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous after I got out of the hospital, um, I actually went back to treatment, and members of Alcoholics Anonymous were coming into the meeting, and I was one of those people who immediately was struck by the men that were standing in front of me carrying the message of hope and carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. It takes one to know one. And, I have been in front of lots of people prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been in front of family members and friends and coaches. And I was a United States Marine myself, police officers, detectives, lawyers, you name it. And none of them had the effect on me that a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous had on me when he said he found God here in Alcoholics Anonymous and it changed his life. And if I was interested, he could show me how that happened. And I became interested very quickly. I went through the 30-day program in Bridgeway, and then I entered the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have to say, like, it's still the thought had crossed my mind after I came into meetings and I saw people in prayer and I heard God and I heard these steps. And I thought to myself, maybe I overreacted about my situation. Maybe I don't really need to be here with all of you. And it brings me to a point in the book where when we are approached in such a way, in a spiritual manner, that many of us pick up our mats and we walk again. And I didn't know what that meant. I'm not educated in the book that story came from, but when I got involved in Alcoholics Anonymous and got surrounded by all of you and people who were very convicted in your relationship with God, um, I became interested in knowing more about this book. And it's interesting. Chris, like I said, was at Akron today, and he said that when he walked in there, they had a Bible open to the Book of James. And it's my understanding that in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what they read. They read out of the Book of James, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and the Sermon on the Mount. And that story that they're talking about, where they say many of us pick up our mats and walk again, it goes back into biblical times, and they're talking about a place where there was healing waters, and people were going to these healing waters, and they believed that when they stirred the waters, that they would be healed from whatever it was that they were ailing from. And there was one individual in particular who continued to go to these healing waters, and he stayed there for decades after decades after decades. He was paralyzed, um, and but he was never willing to do anything for himself. And so, he continued that day by day, and he became a beggar. And lo and behold, one day, you know, I like to refer to him as a little, carpenter dude, came on to the, came to those healing waters, and he picked this guy out very quickly. And he walked up to that man and he asked him one simple question: do you want to be healed? And the man, like myself, had to think about it for a minute. Maybe I overreacted about my situation. Maybe I really don't need any help. Maybe I'm okay just kind of living like it is, like I've been living. And he asked him the question again: do you want to be healed? And he said, yes, I do. And he said, well, then pick up your mat and walk. And in that very moment, that man's life changed forever. He picked up his mat after being paralyzed for decades and walked into a whole new way of life. And that's what happens here in Alcoholics Anonymous. If we're willing to take some direction, and we can find some hope in these rooms by the people that have come before us. And that's what happened for me. And so I got busy real quick. Um, uh, my sponsor will tell you that and a lot of other people will tell you, I was very unapproachable when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was the guy that always had his head down, his arms crossed. I was always sitting in the back of the room. I never smiled. Yet deep down inside, I was dying for this thing, and I just hadn't gotten myself to the point yet where I was really willing to to show myself and show my true fears and feelings. And they gave me the opportunity to do so. So I always say, don't ever be afraid to look past the rough exterior of somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous and see the guy that's dying, or see the young lady that's dying, or the woman that's dying, because that's what's going on. And so, uh, as we started to go through this process, me and my sponsor, we got involved in prayer, and there's a prayer in every step. Sorry. There's a prayer in every step, and he was pointing those steps out to me, and those prayers out to me as we walked through this. And I'll never forget the day I was sitting at his kitchen table, and I had some questions, and it talks in our book. It says the verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. They never apologize for God. Instead, they let him demonstrate through us what he can do. And my sponsor and these men were demonstrations to me of the power of God and how it truly worked. And the only way that I understand that building that relationship with God here in Alcoholics Anonymous really works is through prayer. But I was too fearful to ask somebody to show me how to pray until that day. And I was sitting at the table with him, and I'll never forget, he's got his book, and man, he's full of the Spirit, as he will tell you. And I'm sitting there with my arms crossed and coming up with every reason as to why, I can't cross that bridge or walk through that gate into a relationship with God. And he stayed the course. And by the end of that meeting, I asked him if he would say a prayer with me. And he said, absolutely. And I love the way it went, because he didn't make me feel like it's about time or made me feel less than. He just reached his hand out to me, and one man to the next, one alcoholic to the next, said a prayer together. And it was at that point that I truly opened my heart and opened my mind to the idea of a power greater than myself. And that's where this relationship really started to take off. And it's so neat I'll tell you, my grandmother, who I mentioned used to take us to church all the time. She just passed away back in June at 99 years old. Her name was Opal. Um, Man, I love that lady so much, and because of Alcoholics Anonymous, God gave me 15 years of sobriety with her. And if you could only imagine the type of relationship that me and her developed, it was incredible. I was able to take her to see my brother at the time out in California. Her and her sister, they were both at that point well into their late 80s. And it was, if some of you were on here, it looks like you probably remember the show The Golden Girls. It was me and the Golden Girls, and we were taken off to San Diego to see my brother. And I got an opportunity to experience some things with her in sobriety. That's just one of the things. I got to walk her out on the beach there at Coronado, which I have been to many times as a Marine and whatnot. And I'll never forget. She's holding my hand, and she says to me, "Thank you." And I said, "Thank you for what?" And she said, "Thank you for being the man that you have become." And I said, and at that point, she said, "Whatever you do, just please keep going to those classes that you've been going to." She was very involved in my sobriety and Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, and so, as we developed our relationship, we got to talk about prayer. And she was so interested in learning why I finally came to a place where I wanted to have a relationship with God and prayer. And she wanted to know why I developed a resentment towards God. And so I told her, and I told her the story I mentioned to you guys about my father and seeing him walk into the church that day. And I'll never forget, I was sitting at her kitchen table, everyone, and I'm telling her why, and I'm telling her about that day, and she looks at me, which she was legally blind, but in that day she could see me. I just knew it. I could tell. And she said, "You don't remember, do you?" And I said, "Remember what?" And she said, "You don't remember the pastor at your father's funeral." My father was like I said, was a police officer. He was also a veteran of the Army, served in Vietnam. So he's buried at a national cemetery out here, and it was a big funeral. And I was young and it was quite dramatic. And trauma set in, so I forgot a lot of things. But she told me about the pastor who gave my father's eulogy, and it was the pastor who welcomed him into the church that day. And she went on to tell me the story of that pastor. And that pastor said that one day a man came to his door and knocked and asked if he could come in and speak to him for a while. And the pastor said, "Absolutely." And so he welcomed my father into the church that day. And they got to know each other a little bit. My father let him know that we lived just across the street, that he was a father of two young boys, was married for as many years as he had been married at that point, a lovely wife. And went on to tell him that he had been given the news that he was, not going to make it much longer because of the cancer. And the pastor said, "Well, why are you really here?" And he said, "I'm here because I want you to pray for my family with me." And it gives me goosebumps to this day. That the perception that I had drew was that my father was there to pray for himself, and that God didn't answer his prayer, and that almost took me to my grave. It says, "The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Some must pursue it into the gates of insanity and death." And that was so true in my case. And because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I learned something that I never would have learned, and I would have most likely taken to my grave whenever that day would have come. And so it changed my life forever, as you could expect. God truly did answer his prayers, and God had been with me and my family that whole time. And so you can only imagine the excitement that I drew, being a child of God and being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and having an opportunity to rebuild this relationship with a God that, I like to say, I'm the one that moved. God never moved. I'm the one that moved. And so because of these steps and because of prayer, I was brought back to God, and I was brought back to the power of sobriety in this life that we all get. Everything that I was looking for in alcohol and other things I found in sobriety, and I love that about this journey that we are on, because it truly is a journey, and it was a life that I just never saw coming. My wife and I, thank you for the warning. I see that. Thank you very much. My wife and I, um, she, like I said, is one of us, and we just have an incredible relationship where it started out immediately with prayer, I'll never forget the moment that we started getting pretty close to each other, and we invited each other into our prayer lives. And as the years have gone on, me and her just look at each other sometimes like, I don't know about any of you, but I was not surrounding myself with anybody who was involved in prayer or having a relationship with God. Definitely when it came to relationships, that was not a part of mind of my life. And it's just so incredible to be involved in a relationship where prayer is the single most important thing in our life. For a relationship to succeed, there's got to be three, and that's me, the other person, and God. And I know that to be true today. And so, the things that have taken place in my life, through prayer and through this marriage, as we were able to spend, the last, many years with my grandmother and see her to the end. She had a stroke back in June, and it just at 99 years old, it scrambled her up so much, like you would expect. Um, and through all that, I will tell you how strong faith is. As scrambled up as that woman was, she didn't know her left from her right. She didn't know what year it was anymore. She didn't realize she had a stroke. She would talk to us about things that just made absolutely no sense. But when we started talking about God and her faith with God, man, she was locked in. And I'll never forget asking her if she was ready to go on her journey. As I had to make the decision to put her in hospice, and she said, "You still are the power of attorney, right?" I said, "I am," and I know what that meant was that she had prepared me to make that decision for a long time. And and I said, "I am," and I said, "Are you ready to take your journey?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Who are you going to see?" And I said, "Are you going to see mom and dad and her mother and father and um, and her husband, my grandpa?" And she said, "Yeah, I can't wait to see all of them, and I can't wait to sit at the at the right hand of God and Christ." And and she said, "Do you think they'll recognize me?" And I said, "I absolutely think they will recognize you. As a matter of fact, they'll be sitting there waiting for you." And one of her favorite Bible verses, I won't get into it, is Second Timothy, but she has fought the good fight. She finished the race, and for a guy like me to be able to sit down and say that prayer with her. Um, I can't thank Alcoholics Anonymous enough for giving me that opportunity. I was with her when she took her very last breath. It was just me and her in the room together. She lasted about 4 days on hospice, and it just so happened, as God would have it, that I was with her in that very last moment. And man, I just couldn't thank Alcoholics Anonymous enough and for the life that you guys have given me. Me and my wife got married up in Colorado back in 23. So her sobriety date is 420 of 2010, and mine is 430 of 2010. So we got married in between our sobriety dates on 423 of 23. We got married up in Estes Park, and Alcoholics Anonymous came like you wouldn't believe to our wedding. It was so incredible to have everyone that has become a family. We are people who normally would not mix, right? To be there with us, and to get my grandma there, of all people. She was 97 years old at that point. And how, I mean, miracles happen in Alcoholics Anonymous. And you guys gave us that, and so many other things. So some of the other things that have taken place in our life is, we've been able to travel. I've been to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous in France and Switzerland. I've met people from all over the world that this thing has touched, and the families that Alcoholics Anonymous has touched is just truly remarkable. And to be able to experience Vancouver with all of you, is something that I will never forget and I will take with me always. And I think about Chris being in Akron. And did the guys and ladies in Alcoholics Anonymous, the founding members, ever think that it would grow into what it grew into today? And I know that they hoped and prayed that it would. And I'm so grateful that they kept these steps and these traditions um, going for all of us who desperately needed this thing when we found the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I just hope that I keep the door open and make the next person feel as welcomed as you all have made me feel welcome, and continue to do so. And I'll close with this. It says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We were reborn. And man, I have been reborn in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got a little post-it note on my refrigerator right over there. It says, "Become teachable today," and that's what I have been taught, to remain teachable, and to express gratitude, and to reach my hand out to the newcomer always. It says, "Cling to the thought that in God's hands our dark past is the greatest possession we hold, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, we can avert death and misery for them." So how incredible is that everything that all of us have been through in life, that God has made it possible here in Alcoholics Anonymous for us to find sobriety, find joy, peace, happiness, a relationship with God, and then in turn use that to help somebody else. Thank you very much for allowing me to be of service.
Thank you, Pat. And thank you, Matt. Thank you for saying yes. And thank you for showing up. And happy birthday, Chris. 10 years is a miracle. I want to encourage hands. I want to share the 4 things that I heard while you guys get your hands up, because if not, I'm going to call on you because I can still read names. Here are the 4 things I heard from you, Matt. That I can allow myself to be defined by trauma, by the bad things that happen. And when I do that, I pay a really big price. And the price that I pay is this descent into hell. It's a descent into hell. And you described that well. And then you told a story about, do I want to be healed? Do I want to be? Because this is not for people who need it, it's for people who are willing to do the work. And then finally, I heard you say, which I love, everything that I was looking for in alcohol, I found in Alcoholics Anonymous. Man, that's true. What a beautiful, beautiful share. And for people who are new to us, we are an 11-step meeting. We invite speakers to pick one sentence out of the big book or the 12 and 12 from the 11-step portion of those texts, and to talk for 35 minutes about their relationship with that text and their relationship with God. And so, sorry about the noise. And so I want to encourage people to please put their hand up. And as my friend Teresa always says, let's squeeze some more juice out of Matt. Allison, you're up first. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Hi, I'm Alice, and I am an alcoholic. And Matt, thank you so much for such a great demonstration of your experience with the 11-step and the 12 steps as a whole. One of the things I found a little humorous at the earlier part of your conversation, your talk, was that you were describing where you came from, what your life was like when you were deep in the darkness. And then you had to pause to go take care of your dog. And I just thought, what a contrary action. You're in a suit and you're concerned about your pup and you're living on the streets. And so, I mean, it just, to me, is a demonstration of the power of Alcoholics Anonymous right there. But I so enjoy your share. And you talked about your family and the relationship you had with your family, especially your grandmother. And I know that I've had my own experiences in moving from someone who could only think about myself at all times to someone who started to get a very big heart for the people I love in my life. And through the process of the 12 steps, to start to have compassion and the belief that other people can be exactly who they are. So I wonder if you can share a little bit about your experience in the steps in AA and how you moved from where you came from and that selfish and self-centeredness into the man you are today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so my sponsor, he's half Italian and half Greek. Uh, so if anybody knows what I mean by that, he's a very outspoken man. uh, and it just so happens that I've known him and his family for almost most of my life, about 35 years. I grew up one street over from them. I wasn't very close with him, obviously, but I grew up with his kids. But when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, he had been sober at that point for 15, 16 years. And his life had been transformed. And I know this because I could see how he was with his family, with his kids. These were kids that no longer called him dad. And these were kids that at that point he was walking down the aisle. They were having grandkids. I saw how he was interacting with his wife well in their home. And so I got to a place with him where I was willing to listen to whatever it is he told me. And I told you I was very unapproachable when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that is so true. And you know, let me say that at 15 years of sobriety, I can be very unapproachable today too, if I'm not doing what it is I need to be doing. And so his directions to me in early sobriety were, I don't ever want to see you walk into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous without a smile on your face. I want you to greet people at the front door and welcome them to the North County Club. I want you to pour coffee, and I want you to empty ashtrays. And if you are called on in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, your response would be, thank you, welcome the newcomer, congratulate anybody who's celebrating an anniversary, and let them know that I'm being directed by my sponsor to just listen. And what that did for me was it gave me an opportunity to really see how these steps were working in other people's lives. Because I came in here with a lot to say, so I thought. And it was all about what I talked about being defined by what I told you I was defined by. And so he took that from me. Not knowing that he did so, he took that from me and gave me an opportunity to really understand steps 1, 2, and 3. You know, it talks about in those steps, right, on page 60, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal interest before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, step 1. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, step 2. And C, that God could and would if he were sought, also step 2, right? It goes on to say, being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? Just what do we do? Some of you may know that in the original working manuscript, it says, if you are not yet convinced of those 3 proposals, you ought to reread the book up to that point or else throw it away. And so I'm so grateful that my sponsor kept me in those steps for the time that he kept me in those steps, because they truly are the foundation for recovery. And if I don't know what I'm walking around with, and I don't know who can help me with that, and I don't know how to put my trust and faith in that, then there's no chance on this earth that I'm going to go any further in these steps. So I've always been I've always taken the approach that steps 1, 2, and 3 are there for a reason. And I need to completely understand those steps before I take myself any further with a sponsor, or I take anybody else any further with this, because that is where you start to build your relationship with God. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I hope that helped.
Thank you so much for the question, and Matt, thank you for a great answer. I know you're not Carol, and I should know your name, and I do not. I need you to forgive me. Please come on in. What happened? Where'd you go? I know I unmuted you. Okay, Lauren, until I figure it out, would you please come in?
Thank you, Alice. Hi, my name's Lauren. I'm a very grateful alcoholic. Matt, it took me a second to put my hand up because I was just wrapping my head around all of those beautiful, gosh, there's so much good that you shared. Thank you so very much. I was really moved by your message, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around my question. So I hope my higher power makes it come out coherently. But you know, you spoke a lot to dealing with loss, lots of people in your life that you've lost, and some of those earlier in life, some of those lived to 99. Last year, I dealt with a few different losses in my life, and I feel like it gave me such a new perspective on gratitude for what I have and every day. But I feel that that's fading. I feel that like distractions and life and the world have crept in, and now I'm just back to same old Lauren who is taking it for granted. And I wonder if that's ever been something you've experienced and how you would approach that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'm sorry for your losses. My condolences. So, you know, to my sponsor's point with the direction that I need to sit there and listen, you know, what that did for me, you know, it talks about in the spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, that's a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. And so, in order for that to take place in my life, the only way that was going to take place is if I opened my ears and shut my mouth to what all of you were doing. And what happened over the course of many years is I was able to, as I, you know, my sponsor gave me another direction that I should be able to go to a meeting anywhere within a 50-mile radius of where I live and know somebody in that meeting. And the only way that happens is if I get myself out of my little comfort zone and start seeing how big this thing truly is, Alcoholics Anonymous. And so he had no idea what he was getting ready to do, but he lit a fire under me. And so, I mean, I've been to meetings all over the United States. I got friends in recovery from the West Coast to the East Coast, North, South, over in Europe, Russia, Canada now. But what happened through all that was, see, I'm the type of guy that will walk into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and say, "How you doing?" And before you can even tell me anything about yourself, I'm already gone. And that's the kind of guy I was. And I can be that guy again in Alcoholics Anonymous unless I have somebody that's willing to give me some direction and say, sit down and listen. Go up and introduce yourself to another alcoholic and don't talk about yourself. And so these were the directions I was given. And by doing so, I started to hear what was going on in other people's lives and see and experience from their perspective how they were raised or raised before they came into Alcoholics Anonymous, for some of the trauma that they experienced. Not everybody has to experience trauma in Alcoholics Anonymous to be in Alcoholics Anonymous, but it does happen, right? And so, you know, I know people in Alcoholics Anonymous who never had a father that told them they loved them, or watched their father beat their mother to, to no end, or beat them to no end, or have a mother who walked away on their children. All these horrific stories I consider them to be horrific stories I've heard in Alcoholics Anonymous. Yet these people are sitting in front of me changed, and they have peace and joy and happiness in their life, and most importantly, they have a relationship with God. So, see, at that point, I have no choice but to make a decision. Am I going to fall into the poor me thing? Or am I going to see that, like I said, miracles truly do happen in Alcoholics Anonymous? And what that gave me was, I had forgotten that I had two parents that told me they loved me every single day, regardless of what happened. But see, I forgot that. And Alcoholics Anonymous gave me that back by being willing to sit there and listen and get to know somebody else on a level that I was never willing to get to know somebody else before. So I don't know if that helps you, but maybe talk to your sponsor. But maybe it's a time for you to go into some meetings, and just if you're asked to call, if they call on you, take that direction. Congratulate anybody who's celebrating an anniversary. Welcome the newcomer. Go talk to that newcomer after the meeting's over and say, I've been instructed to just listen right now, and you'll hear God.
Thank you, Matt. I don't know how it happened, but we've got 2 minutes left. We've got two hands. So I don't know, Daniel, that we're going to get to you. I sure do want to. Don't be mad at me, though. There's always column one, though. And then you got to promise you're going to come back next week. Promise. Okay. Come on in.
Wonderful share. Actually, my name's Bob. I'm Carol's husband.
Hi, Bob.
Matt, I could hear your appreciation for the program and your devotion to this. That really came through. My question is the resentment that you talked about for the pastor opening the door for your dad. That was huge. The you know, all the resentment and all the negative energy around mom and dad passing away, like you had something to throw it at. What I'm curious is was it your sponsor and the 4-step? How did you process that? How did you come? A relative told you later that, hey, you don't know the whole story. But I'm assuming you had to do a 4-step on that resentment before. Could you tell me a little bit about that process, what that looked like, how your sponsor drew that out of you?
Absolutely. So yeah, so obviously those were the things that were on my 4-step, primarily, and so talking with him in private, um, it became very apparent to him, like I had mentioned, that I use that as a means of gaining something. I use that self-pity, that sympathy as a means of gaining something, and I was doing that in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous because that's all I knew how to do. So his directions to me, like how to say shut up and listen, and some of the other things he asked me to do. Another thing he asked me to do was, I don't ever want to hear you talk about your mother or father again in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous until I tell you to, and until it serves good purpose. And so that was very difficult for me, as you would expect, because I allowed it to define me. But by doing so, he gave me an opportunity to look at other things, and he got me thinking about where my part was. Because see, I grew up in a household where I had a brother who was 15 months younger than I, and as I've heard and seen in other people's families, my brother is not one of us. Yet he experienced the same things that I experienced with the passing of our mother and our father. And so um, I made decisions based on self, which later placed me in a position to get hurt. And so I got to see the truth in me through that 4-step, and see where I got the ball rolling, where I made the decisions that later placed me 18 years later in the darkness that it placed me in. So that's what the 4-step's all about. I'm there to find the truth about myself, to digest some big chunks of truth about myself. And so I don't carry that anymore today, because I know that the reason that I got myself to where I got myself was because of me. It had nothing to do with the passing of my father or my mother, or other things that took place in our life. And I would have never had the opportunity without getting pen or pencil on paper and really seeing the truth. Now, you see the truth and you see the ugliness of it, but something that he always had me do too was look at my assets. So, I'm not there just to beat myself up. There are some good things about me. We are all blessed with God-given instincts. It's just through alcoholism and, other things, we take those instincts and we twist them into very manipulative ways. And so, I don't know if that helps you out or not at all, but that's how I got to the bottom of it all with the help of a sponsor. And I don't know how else I would have ever gotten to the bottom of that without one alcoholic to the next.